It was a dark time for Israel. The people had once again broken their covenant with the Lord, and divine judgment arose like a tide from the sea. God delivered them into the hands of the Philistines, fearsome warriors from across the water, infamous for their brutality. They possessed a terrifying advantage: the secret of iron. While the Israelites still fought with bronze, the Philistines wielded swords that were harder, sharper, and far more deadly. The merciless Philistines captured the descendants of Abraham, pillaged their fields, and for 40 long years subjected the people of Israel to humiliation and slavery. But God wouldn't abandon his chosen people. In a forgotten village belonging to the tribe of Dan, within the barren womb of a woman, God was preparing an answer. From that unlikely place would be born a man destined to alter the course of history: Samson. This is the story of Israel's most feared judge, a man who tore a lion apart with his bare hands, slaughtered 1,000 men, and brought down an entire temple using nothing but his incredible strength. But it's also the story of his downfall. Samson was, after all, human, and he possessed a weakness: women. His greatest struggle wasn't against the Philistines, but against himself, against the pride that eventually cost him everything, until he rediscovered that his faith was his greatest strength. In a small village nestled in the hills of the tribe of Dan, there lived a man named Manoah and his wife. They were a simple, humble couple. Yet, they carried a heavy burden of sorrow. They were unable to have children. In those times, this was viewed as a deep shame, as if their lives were somehow incomplete. The woman's pain mirrored a larger national tragedy. Israel, God's people, was also without hope, a barren nation oppressed by its enemies. One day, while the woman was alone in the fields, she was enveloped by a brilliant light. An angel appeared before her and delivered a message that would forever change her life. "You are barren and childless," the angel said, "but you are going to conceive and give birth to a son. Now, listen carefully. I urge you, drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing that is considered unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because this boy will be a Nazirite to God from the moment of his birth. He will begin to deliver Israel from the power of the Philistines." The woman, still trembling with emotion, immediately ran to tell her husband everything that had happened. Filled with both wonder and fear, Manoah pleaded with God to send the angel back so they could fully understand what they needed to do. And God heard his prayer. God's angel appeared again and repeated the message. They would have a son who must adhere to the Nazirite vow. Being a Nazirite was a very special promise made to God, signifying that a person was completely dedicated to him. To fulfill this vow, the child would have to follow some very important rules: never drink wine or any similar alcoholic beverage, never touch anything considered unclean, and, above all, never cut his hair. Manoah, overwhelmed with respect and gratitude, prepared an offering for God, a sacrifice made on a rock. And then something incredible occurred. As the smoke and flames from the sacrifice rose towards the heavens, the angel of the Lord ascended with the flame and then vanished. Manoah, terrified, exclaimed to his wife, "We are surely going to die because we have seen God." But his wife, filled with faith, replied, "If God had intended to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted our offering. He wouldn't have told us these wonderful things or made us this amazing promise." And so, from barrenness came the promise of life. From that woman was born a child destined from the very beginning to deliver the chosen people. His name was no mere coincidence, but a prophecy. Samson, meaning little son, was to be a ray of light announcing the dawn of liberation in the midst of the darkness of Philistine oppression. From his earliest years, Samson was different. The Spirit of God began to stir within him, granting him incredible strength that defied explanation. With each passing year, his muscles grew more powerful, but an even greater battle raged within his heart. Part of him longed to obey God and fulfill the purpose for which he was born, but another part yearned to be a normal young man and do whatever he pleased. This inner conflict, this struggle between obeying God and following his own desires, would accompany him throughout his entire life, and very soon, it would bring him significant trouble. When Samson grew into a young man, everyone in Israel was aware of his extraordinary strength, but also of his impulsiveness. They knew he acted without thinking, often allowing himself to be swept away by his immediate desires. One day, he traveled to a Philistine city called Timnah, and there he saw a beautiful Philistine woman. The Philistines, of course, were the enemies of the people of Israel, the oppressors and colonizers who didn't follow God's laws. But Samson didn't care that she was a Philistine. He simply saw her, and in that instant, he decided that she had to be his wife. When he returned home, he told his parents, "I've seen a woman in Timnah, one of the Philistine daughters. Get her for me as my wife." His parents were shocked and replied with concern, "Isn't there a woman among your own people, among all our relatives, that you have to go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" Samson's parents understood that marrying a Philistine was dangerous. It could easily lead him to break his covenant with God. But logic held no sway over Samson. His answer was direct and uncompromising. "Get her for me. She's the one I want." To everyone watching, it appeared to be nothing more than the reckless whim of a headstrong young man. But what no one realized was that this seemingly impulsive act was actually the first step in God's plan for Samson's mission. Samson and his parents set out on the road to Timnah. At one point, Samson strayed from the main path and ventured into a place that was particularly dangerous for him: a vineyard. As a Nazirite, Samson was bound by 3 primary prohibitions. He couldn't drink wine, he couldn't touch anything unclean, and he couldn't cut his hair. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. A deep, blood-curdling roar echoed through the vines. From the dense undergrowth, a young lion leaped out, strong, hungry, and heading directly for him. Samson stood alone, without a sword or shield, completely unarmed in the face of certain death. But in that precise moment, the Spirit of God descended upon him, and supernatural strength surged through every fiber of his being. Fear vanished, replaced by overwhelming power. Samson seized the lion and with his bare hands, tore it apart as easily as if it were a young goat. No one witnessed the event, and Samson didn't tell anyone what had occurred. But later, when he was returning to marry the woman, he went back to the place where he had killed the lion. He approached the animal's carcass and saw something remarkable. Inside it, a swarm of bees had built a honeycomb full of honey. Samson reached in, scooped out the honey, and ate it as he walked along the road. He even gave some to his parents, but he didn't tell them that the honey had come from the dead lion's body. This seemingly insignificant act was, in fact, quite serious. As a Nazirite, Samson wasn't supposed to touch anything unclean, especially the corpse of an animal. Deep down, Samson was toying with the boundaries of his calling, disobeying and testing how far he could go without losing God's blessing. Samson's wedding day arrived, and as was the custom among the Philistines, the celebration was a grand feast lasting 7 full days. There was an abundance of food and drink, and music filled the air everywhere. 30 young Philistine men were chosen to accompany Samson. But this grand feast was also a kind of trap for Samson. It's important to remember that Samson had made a vow to live differently, avoiding excesses such as drinking too much wine. Yet, Samson was determined to impress everyone, and to show off his cleverness, he challenged them with a riddle. In a booming voice, he announced to the 30 Philistines, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. If you can solve this riddle during the 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 fine garments and 30 sets of clothes. But if you can't figure it out, you'll give them to me." Everyone was deeply intrigued, puzzling over the riddle. 3 whole days passed, but no one could find the answer. The men grew increasingly nervous and desperate. On the 4th day, they made a cruel decision. They went to threaten Samson's wife. They told her, "Get your husband to tell us the answer, or we'll burn you and your father's house. Did you invite us here just to rob us and make us poor?" The woman, terrified, went to confront her husband, and weeping against his chest, she said, "You hate me. You don't love me. You've given my people a riddle, and you haven't even explained it to me." Samson snapped back harshly, "I haven't even told my father or mother. Why would I tell you?" She wouldn't stop crying, and every single day left of the feast, she kept at him relentlessly. Samson held out as long as he could, but on the 7th day, worn down by the pressure, he revealed the secret. She immediately ran to tell her people, and before the sun went down, the Philistines gave Samson the answer. What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Samson felt utterly betrayed. Glaring at them with rage, he shot back, "If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you never would have solved my riddle." With these words, Samson was telling them that they had used his wife to get the answer, just like a farmer uses an animal to plow a field. The game had turned into humiliation, a terrible disgrace for him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him with incredible power, and filled with fury, he went down to Ashkelon, a Philistine city. There he killed 30 men, stripped them of their clothes, and gave them to those who had solved the riddle. Furious and deeply wounded by his wife's betrayal, he returned to his father's house. As the days passed, Samson's anger cooled, and he decided to try reconciling with his wife. He walked to her house carrying a young goat as a peace offering. But when he arrived, his father-in-law slammed the door in his face and said, "I truly thought you hated her. That's why I gave her to your companion. But look, her younger sister is more beautiful than she is. Take her instead." Samson's composure shattered. The woman he had chosen, the very reason he had ventured into enemy territory, had been handed over to another man as if she were mere property. His humiliation transformed into an ice-cold fury, and through clenched teeth he declared, "This time I'll be blameless when I harm the Philistines." The offense wasn't just against him. It was against his honor and against his God. The Philistines would pay, but how could one man punish an entire nation? Then Samson devised a plan as strange as it was destructive. He went out to hunt foxes, or more precisely jackals, and captured 300 of them. He tied them together by their tails, 2 by 2, and fastened a burning torch between each pair. Then he released them into the Philistine fields. Within minutes, fire spread like a devouring roar. The result was apocalyptic. Flames raged through the crops, vineyards burned, wheat fields were consumed, even the olive groves were destroyed. The impact was devastating. An entire year's harvest, the land that sustained the Philistines, vanished in a single night of smoke and flames. When the Philistines saw the destruction, they demanded to know who had done such a thing. And the answer came quickly. It was Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because the man gave his wife to his companion. Filled with rage, the Philistines sought revenge. They went to the Timnite's house and set it ablaze, burning Samson's wife and her father alive. The news hit Samson like a crushing blow. The woman who had started it all, the love that had brought him to Timnah, had died because of him in the cruelest way imaginable. His grief transformed into a burning thirst for revenge, and he swore before heaven, "Since you have done this to me, I swear I will have my vengeance upon you, and only then will I be satisfied." And Samson kept his word. He fell upon them like a storm, unleashing his strength in a merciless slaughter. The air filled with screams, and the ground was littered with corpses. After the massacre, Samson withdrew, exhausted and with his heart still burning, and sought refuge in the cave at the rock of Etam. But the Philistines wouldn't let such an offense go unpunished. They marched against Judah and made camp in the region of Lehi. The men of Judah, terrified, asked, "Why have you come up against us?" They answered plainly, "We have come to capture Samson and to do to him as he has done to us." The message struck the hearts of the Israelites like an iron blow. Samson had provoked a war they weren't willing to fight. They weren't thinking about freedom from oppression, but about survival. So, they decided to act. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cave at the rock of Etam, where Samson was hiding. 3,000 of his own brothers sent not to support him, but to hand him over. When they found him, they looked at him with reproach and said, "Don't you know the Philistines rule over us? What have you done to us?" To them, Samson wasn't a liberator, but a problem. His strength had ignited the Philistines' wrath, and his people, instead of rising up alongside him, chose to subdue him to save their own necks. Samson looked at them and answered coldly, "I only did to them what they did to me." But the men of Judah didn't stop there. "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson could have defeated them right there, but understanding that this was part of God's plan, and seeing his people's fear, he agreed to be bound. He asked only one thing, that they not kill him themselves. They swore to this, tied him with 2 new ropes, and led him from the rock to deliver him to his enemies. When they reached Lehi, the Philistines shouted in triumph. They believed they finally had in their hands the man who had devastated their fields and humiliated their armies. But in that instant, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson with power. Suddenly, the ropes binding him became like burnt flax, and they fell from his arms as if they had never existed. Samson looked around for a weapon, and the only thing he found was a jawbone, the jaw of a donkey that had recently died. He gripped it tightly and began to fight. Dust rose up, screams filled the air, and the Philistines fell one after another. With a simple donkey's bone, Samson killed 1,000 men. The field was littered with corpses, and he, panting, raised his voice and declared, "With a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men." When the battle ended, Samson was exhausted, so tired and thirsty that he was about to collapse, and he cried out desperately to God, "You have given me this great victory. Will I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of those who don't know you?" Suddenly a crack opened in the ground and water began to flow from it. Samson drank, regained his strength, and felt alive again. That's why the place was called En-Hakkore, which means the spring of the one who called out. After that great victory, Samson officially became a judge of Israel. For the next 20 years, Samson led his people. The Philistines feared him, and though they still ruled the land, they couldn't rest easy, knowing that at any moment Samson might strike again. The more famous Samson became, the more the Philistines hated him. His exploits had made him public enemy number 1, a ghost who appeared where they least expected him and left destruction in his wake. But Samson still had the same fatal weakness: women. One night, he went down to Gaza, one of the most important and fortified Philistine cities. There he sought out a prostitute and spent the night with her. It was a reckless act, walking into the heart of enemy territory, into a walled city crawling with soldiers, just to satisfy a fleeting desire. Word that Samson was in Gaza spread like wildfire. The Philistines locked the city gates and posted guards at the entrance, convinced they had him cornered. "Let's wait until dawn, then we'll kill him," they said. They were certain that when daybreak came, Samson would fall into their trap. But Samson didn't wait for dawn. He rose at midnight and went straight to the gates that protected the city. They were massive wooden gates with giant posts and iron bars, making them impossible to break down. But Samson ripped them out with his bare hands. The weight was staggering, probably over 800 pounds. But Samson hoisted the entire structure onto his shoulders and walked for miles until he reached Hebron, an Israelite city perched high in the mountains. There, he planted the gates like a trophy, a silent and humiliating message. The Philistine walls couldn't stop him. Their security was an illusion, and not even the most heavily guarded city could hold back the man God had raised up. The news spread like wildfire. For the Israelites, it was a reminder that God was still with their judge. For the Philistines, it was the ultimate mockery. They had lost the gates that symbolized their strength and pride, and with them, they had lost their honor. But this spectacular and humiliating display of power would soon be overshadowed, because Samson didn't know that a far more dangerous trap was approaching, one that would ultimately seal his fate. In the valley of Sorek, Samson's destiny changed forever. There he met a woman named Delilah. She wasn't a warrior or a princess, but her cunning was a far deadlier weapon. The man who could demolish armies with his bare hands found himself defenseless against her beauty. Samson, capable of killing 1,000 men, couldn't resist one woman. The Philistines saw the perfect opportunity and hatched a plan. The 5 Philistine lords approached Delilah with a proposal. They offered her 1,100 silver shekels, over 14 pounds of pure silver, an amount that could buy anyone's loyalty in those days. In exchange, all she had to do was discover the secret of his strength and how they could overpower him. And Delilah, driven by greed, accepted the deal. Soon after, with feigned sweetness, she asked Samson directly, "Please tell me what makes you so strong, and how you could be tied up and subdued." Samson, confident and toying with her, lied. "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that haven't dried yet, I'll become weak and be like any other man." That very night, while he slept, Delilah tied him with the 7 bowstrings. Philistine soldiers waited, hidden in the room, ready to strike. Then she shouted the agreed signal. "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke up and snapped the bowstrings with astonishing ease, as if they were straw touched by flame. The secret remained safe. The first trap had failed. Delilah didn't give up. She approached him again, pretending to be hurt. "You've deceived me and told me lies. Now tell me the truth." Giving in a little more to her persistence, he gave her another false answer. "If you tie me tightly with new ropes that have never been used, then I'll become weak." The plan repeated itself. She got new ropes, tied him while he slept, and once again shouted with all her might, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Once more he rose up and snapped them from his arms as if they were mere threads. The second attempt was another failure. Delilah's frustration grew, but her determination to get that fortune was much stronger, and for the third time, she pressured him to reveal the secret of his power. Samson gave her yet another false answer. "If you weave the 7 braids of my hair into the loom and secure them, then I'll be as weak as anyone else." She waited for him to fall asleep and carefully wove his thick hair into the loom, securing it firmly. Then she shouted the usual alarm. "Samson, the Philistines are coming for you." He woke with a start, and with extraordinary strength, not only broke free but ripped the entire loom from the wall and carried it off with him. 3 attempts, 3 failures. Delilah realized that games weren't working, so she changed her strategy. Now she would use her most powerful weapon, emotional manipulation. She began to cry and hurl accusations at him. "How can you say you love me when you won't trust me?" Her strategy was to break him down from the inside. Day after day, her words were constant torment. The pressure was so intense that, as Scripture says, his soul was vexed unto death. Finally, Samson broke and told her the whole truth, the secret of his consecration to God. "I have been a Nazirite since my mother's womb," he confessed. He explained that a Nazirite was a person consecrated to God under a special vow. This vow included never cutting his hair. His long hair was the visible symbol of his covenant with God. If he broke that covenant, the consequences would be total. "If I am shaved, my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man." Delilah knew he wasn't lying this time, and that this time he had given her his heart. Then she sent an urgent message to the Philistine rulers. "Come at once, for he has finally revealed his whole heart to me." Samson, exhausted and trusting, fell asleep on her lap. The Philistines arrived, this time with silver in their hands. It was a picture of perfect betrayal. While he slept, Delilah called for a man to shave off his 7 locks. The first lock fell, then the second, then the third. With each lock that hit the ground, a 20-year vow was broken until the last lock, the 7th, fell, and the covenant was shattered forever. The Bible describes it with a simple, terrible phrase, "And his strength left him." Delilah cried out one last time, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke up calmly, confident he would escape as before. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. He tried to break free but couldn't. His strength was gone. Israel's hero was now just an ordinary man. The Philistines seized him instantly, and in an act of unspeakable cruelty, gouged out his eyes, leaving him blind forever. Disoriented, they bound him with heavy bronze chains and dragged him to Gaza as a war trophy. There, the man who had delivered Israel was forced to grind grain in prison like a slave, doing the work of animals. Thus, the judge of Israel, the strongest man of his time, became a spectacle of humiliation. But what the Philistines didn't know was that there, in the darkness of the prison, Samson's true transformation was beginning. He had lost his sight, his strength, and his freedom. But in losing everything, he would learn. Here's the translation and rewriting of the text, as requested. What he had never understood was this: true strength wasn't about bulging muscles or a full head of hair. Real strength came from complete dependence on God. As the days went by, Samson began to truly understand that God hadn't taken away his strength because he lost his hair. It was because his faith in God had been shattered. He finally understood that he'd been playing a dangerous game, pushing the limits of his sacred vow, always assuming that God would have his back, no matter what reckless things he did. But he was wrong, so very wrong. In the darkness of his prison cell, Samson finally grasped a truth that had eluded him during the height of his power and fame. He discovered that his biggest flaw his most glaring weakness, was living a life separated from God. The man who had always relied on his physical strength started, for the very first time, to truly surrender to the Lord's will. And then, a miracle happened. His hair started growing back. It wasn't just hair. It was a symbol of hope. Solid proof that the covenant could be restored, that even a completely defeated man could rise again. His story wasn't over yet. And despite everything he'd done, God still had a purpose for him, a plan that was yet to unfold. The Philistines, completely drunk on their recent victory, decided to throw a massive festival to honor their god, Dagon. He was half fish, half man, and they considered him to be the father of Baal, and a symbol of their prosperity and success. This wasn't just a simple religious celebration. It was a political statement, a blatant display of power. They wanted to loudly proclaim to the entire world that Dagon had defeated the God of Israel, and that their idol had delivered the most feared judge in all the land right into their hands. The temple was packed to the rafters. An estimated 3,000 people crammed onto the roof and filled the surrounding areas, all eager to witness the spectacle. All of the Philistine princes and leaders were there, the top military brass and political elite, all celebrating what they truly believed was their ultimate and decisive victory over Israel. It was a massive national assembly, all gathered to celebrate the public humiliation of their enemy. The man who had haunted their nightmares for so long was now going to be their personal jester, a source of endless amusement. They gave the order for Samson to be brought out, and he was dragged to the center of the temple. Samson appeared blind, his eye sockets empty and hollow. He was so weakened that a servant had to hold him up and guide him, like a frail, very old man. The scene was utterly humiliating. The hero who once struck terror into their hearts now walked in chains, stumbling and faltering, much to the delight of the jeering crowd. But then, as the crowd continued to mock and ridicule him, Samson leaned in discreetly toward the young boy who was leading him and whispered, "Place me where I can feel the pillars that hold up the temple, so I can lean against them for support." The boy, completely unaware of what was about to happen, led him to the two massive pillars, made of wood and stone, that supported the entire structure. This type of architecture was common in Philistine temples, and it placed the entire weight of the roof on these two central columns. As he touched both pillars with his hands, Samson knew that he held in his arms not only vengeance for his lost eyes, but also the fate of all Philistia. It was then, amid the deafening clamor of the temple, that Samson lifted up his final prayer, a desperate cry that pierced through the Philistines' mockery and reached the very heavens. "Lord God," he prayed, "remember me now and strengthen me, I pray, just this one last time, O God, so that I may take vengeance on the Philistines for my two eyes." With these words, he revealed everything he had learned through his suffering and brokenness. He recognized that the strength he possessed was never his own, but God's gift, and he wasn't asking for a long life, but for just one powerful moment in the name of the Lord. Then he placed his right hand firmly on one pillar and his left hand on the other. The noise of the celebration completely drowned out the murmur of his voice. He breathed deeply, feeling the cold, rough stone beneath his palms. And then, with a cry that thundered through the entire temple, he pushed with all his might, shouting, "Let me die with the Philistines!" The two central pillars immediately began to crack under the immense pressure. The roof shuddered violently, and in an instant, the laughter and cheers turned into screams of sheer terror. The entire structure collapsed in on itself. Stone and wood rained down like a destructive torrent. Dust filled the air, bodies were buried beneath the rubble, and the deafening crash shook the entire city to its foundations. The two central pillars began to crack. The structure groaned for a brief moment, and then suddenly gave way. The roof, with its 3,000 spectators, crashed down on the leaders, celebrating below. The entire structure completely collapsed. The temple was instantly transformed into a tomb of dust and death, where the sounds of laughter were replaced with muffled cries of terror and agony. In a single devastating instant, the political, military, and religious elite of Philistia were completely annihilated. The Bible summarizes the event with a stark and powerful phrase: "So he killed many more when he died than he had killed during his entire life." His final act had a devastating strategic impact, far greater than all of his previous battles and victories combined. But it came at a terrible price. Samson died there, crushed beneath the rubble alongside his enemies, and through the ultimate sacrifice of his own life, he finally fulfilled the mission he was born to complete: to begin the deliverance of Israel from Philistine oppression. His death wasn't a defeat. It was the ultimate fulfillment of his destiny. The judge who had led Israel for 20 long years, with his final breath, placed his trust in God once more and accomplished the very purpose for which he had been consecrated from his mother's womb. He will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. When the dust from the temple finally settled, his brothers and his father's entire household came down to Gaza to retrieve his body. They carried him home and buried him in his father's tomb, in the land where he was born. There rested the man who had led Israel for 2 decades. The man whose fall ultimately left a much deeper and more lasting mark than all of his victories ever could. His story became deeply etched in Israel's collective memory as a powerful and cautionary warning. A man may possess the most extraordinary gifts and talents, but without faithfulness to God, those very gifts can become the seeds of his own downfall and destruction. When Samson lost his physical eyes, he finally saw with spiritual clarity. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that without God, he was truly nothing. That true strength never lay in his hair or his muscles, but in his unwavering faith. What Samson could never achieve in his own strength, he finally accomplished in his weakness, when he completely depended on the Lord. His final prayer stands as a timeless testimony of faith, a cry that serves as a constant reminder that trusting in the Lord in our darkest and most desperate hour is the greatest form of victory. And his death, a sacrifice made to save his people, became a distant echo of the redemption principle that centuries later would be perfectly fulfilled in Christ. From Samson, we learn that weakness surrendered to God can be transformed into the greatest of victories. His life serves as a powerful mirror, reminding us just how fragile and vulnerable we truly are, and that redemption doesn't always come at the peak of success and achievement. Sometimes it arrives in our darkest hour, when we least expect it. It's never too late to trust in the Lord and to turn back to Him. And this incredible story now calls out to you, the listener. Perhaps you too are at that very point where everything seems utterly lost, where you feel you have absolutely no strength left, where your story seems to have reached its tragic end. But if you place your trust in the Lord, He can transform your brokenness into purpose, your fall into a valuable lesson, and your weakness into your greatest and most defining victory. It's absolutely crucial that if you know someone who desperately needs to hear this powerful message, you share this video with them immediately. It could be exactly what they need to rise again, to find hope in their despair. Support this powerful teaching with a like. And if you don't already know the story of Israel's wisest judge, Solomon, or of Isaiah, one of the most important prophets to whom God revealed the end times, I'm leaving their incredible biblical stories on screen for you to explore. Blessings to you and your family.